Spain, the year 1478. While Europe bleeds through wars, epidemics, and religious upheaval, something different is brewing on the Iberian Peninsula. Something that will mix faith, power, and fear into an almost perfect formula. In Castile and Aragon, the Catholic monarchs, Isabella and Ferdinand, have just solidified their dynastic union. The kingdom grows stronger, more centralized. The Reconquista is in its final phase, and the only thing that seems to escape the crown's control is the conscience of its subjects. For centuries, Christians, Jews, and Muslims have lived side by side, sometimes peacefully, sometimes in conflict. But as the 15th century progresses, tensions rise, persecutions, forced conversions, and violent outbursts become more frequent. Many Jews, facing growing danger, convert to Christianity. Thus are born the so-called conversos. But something lingers in the air. Have they truly embraced the new faith? Or are they secretly still practicing Judaism? This fear, this suspicion, turns into obsession. In the streets, people whisper, accuse, point fingers. That neighbor who doesn't eat pork? Suspicious. The one lighting candles on Friday night? Heretic. Distrust grows, fed not only by fanaticism, but by envy, greed, and resentment. It is then that the Catholic monarchs do something unprecedented. They request from Pope Sixtus IV the right to establish their own Inquisition, one not controlled by Rome, but by the Spanish crown itself. The Pope, under pressure, agrees. And thus, the Spanish Inquisition is officially born. But why? What truly drives this decision? The defense of the faith? The salvation of souls? Perhaps. But there are also more earthly motives. Despite the hatred they inspire, many conversos have prospered. They are doctors, bankers, lawyers. Accusing them of heresy isn't just a religious act. It's a chance to strip them of their wealth and weaken their influence. The first inquisitorial tribunal is established in Seville in 1480. And what happens there goes beyond nightmare. The prisons fill up. Trials are held in secret. No one knows who has denounced whom. And when it's time for punishment, it all turns into a macabre spectacle. The pyres blaze in the town squares. Smoke rises to the heavens as the crowd watches, in silence, or perhaps with relief, because this time it's not them. Fear spreads like a plague, not just among the conversos, but among everyone, because now anyone can be accused. A gesture, a word, a grudge is enough. The Inquisition becomes the perfect tool of control. It doesn't just watch over faith, it watches over thought. It watches over the soul. Behind all of this, one name echoes with power. Thomas de Torquemada, the first Grand Inquisitor, confessor to Queen Isabella, and symbol of inquisitorial severity. For Torquemada, there is no room for doubt. You are either with the Church or against it. Under his leadership, the number of prosecutions soars. And with each sentence, the power of the Holy Office grows stronger. But be warned, the Spanish Inquisition is not a mere copy of earlier medieval inquisitions. It is more centralized, more organized, more methodical, and above all, more at the service of the state. Here, they do not act from divine inspiration, but by royal command, and that makes it even more dangerous. Conversos will not be their only target. Soon others will come. Moriscos, Protestants, mystics, witches. But that's another story. For now, what matters is that in this very moment, in the heart of the peninsula, a flame has been lit. A flame that will burn for centuries, that will shape generations, and that will cast fear into the darkest corners of the Spanish soul. The Inquisition has been born, and with it, an era where suspicion is worth more than truth, where orthodoxy crushes reason, and where silence may be the only salvation. But the great question still hangs in the air. Was it truly faith that ignited this machine? Or was it, as so often in history, the hunger for power disguised as virtue? Imagine this. You're at home. Night is falling. A knock at the door. 3 men dressed in black with a cross embroidered in red and gold enter without a word. They read you an accusation you don't understand. Someone, you don't know who, has claimed that you don't pray properly, that you eat meat on Fridays, or that you keep forbidden books. You're arrested, taken away, and no one hears from you for weeks, months, or ever again. This was how the Inquisition worked. Its power didn't lie solely in the flames. Its most effective weapon was fear. And that fear began with silence and secrecy. The entire inquisitorial process was shrouded in an impenetrable veil. Accusations were anonymous. The accused never knew who their accusers were. There were no defense attorneys. The accused didn't even know the specific charges or what evidence was being used against them. And that was terrifying. Anyone could denounce you. A neighbor, a former friend, a business rival, even a family member. A mere suspicion, envy, or personal vendetta was enough. The tribunal accepted all accusations. And from that point on, the machinery kicked into motion. First came the arrest, then confinement. The inquisitors questioned, took notes, observed. The silence of the tribunal mixed with that of the damp, dimly lit cells, where the accused would spend entire days not knowing if they would make it out alive. Often they were offered the chance to confess. But confess to what? They didn't know, and so many invented crimes just to end the torment. And if a confession didn't come, there was another tool, torture. Yes, torture. Regulated, they said, by strict canon laws. In theory, prohibited if the accused was ill or had already confessed. But in practice, it was applied with ease. The rack, the strappado, water torture. Instruments used to break both bodies and wills. They weren't looking for truth. They wanted submission. And when the accused finally said what the inquisitors wanted to hear, the trial moved forward. Punishments varied, from minor public penance, like wearing the San Benito, a shameful garment painted with symbolic images, to long prison terms, confiscation of property, or excommunication. But there was one punishment that stood above the rest, the stake. Ah, the stake, the ultimate symbol of divine punishment, and the Inquisition's favorite public spectacle. Because this wasn't just about executing people, it was about showing, demonstrating to the public what happened to heretics, to rebels, to those who dared think differently. And for that, there was the auto da fe, a public event organized with near religious pomp. Church bells rang. The entire city gathered. The condemned were paraded through the streets, dressed in San Benitos, tall pointed hats, and symbols of their sins. Clergy delivered sermons. Sentences were read aloud. Some were reconciled. Others were handed over to the secular arm, in other words, the executioner. And then the fire. Flames rose, smoke filled the air, and the crowd watched in silence, in fear, and sometimes with morbid fascination. Because yes, the auto da fe was also a form of entertainment. Macabre, brutal, but effective. One of the most infamous was held in Valladolid in 1559. More than a dozen people accused of Lutheranism were burned. Among them was Dr. Cazalla, a respected canon accused of preaching reformist ideas. His family was also prosecuted. His sister was sentenced to life in prison. It was a clear warning. Not nobility, not clergy, not prestige. Nothing could save you. And the most terrifying part? All of this happened under the guise of legality, because the Inquisition wasn't a group of isolated fanatics. It was a state institution, with tribunals, archives, rules, and trained inquisitors. Their documents were meticulously written, their procedures recorded. They had a system, they had authority, but they also had something else, absolute control over the truth. Whatever they declared heresy was heresy. Whatever they decided was a confession. In that world, doubt was a sin. Free thought, a betrayal, and silence, the only path to survival. But who were these condemned people, really? What did the Inquisition actually mean by heresy? And why were some groups persecuted more than others? Who were the heretics? What did it take to fall into the hands of the Holy Office? The answer is as broad as it is unsettling, because in the Spain of the Inquisition, being different was dangerous. At first, the main targets were the conversos, Jews converted to Christianity, many of them under pressure or out of fear. But even after baptism, they continued to be viewed with suspicion. Why? Because many maintained ancestral customs, not eating pork, secretly celebrating the Sabbath, observing mourning as dictated by Hebrew tradition. Intimate gestures that became evidence of heresy. The most common accusation was Judaizing, secretly practicing the Jewish religion after being baptized as a Christian. Thousands were denounced, arrested, interrogated, and in many cases condemned. Their assets confiscated, their families marked, their memory erased. But the conversos were not the only ones. With the arrival of the 16th century, another group fell under inquisitorial scrutiny. The Moriscos, Muslims who had been forced to convert to Christianity after the conquest of the Kingdom of Granada in 1492. Like the Jews, many Moriscos tried to maintain their customs, language, funeral rites, and diet in secret. For the Inquisition, this was apostasy, a betrayal of the true faith. In Valencia, Aragon, Andalusia, trials against Moriscos multiplied. In some villages, nearly the entire population was investigated. Houses were spied on, food was inspected, prayers listened to, books searched, and if anything sounded Moorish, it was grounds for arrest. But there was more, much more. The Inquisition also persecuted Protestants, especially after Luther's rise in Europe. In Spain, Lutheranism was scarce, but its threat was exaggerated. Simply mentioning ideas about salvation through faith or reading the Bible in the vernacular could be considered heresy. Freedom of thought was dangerous. That's why even those who were not Protestants but simply intellectuals or mystics could be accused. A chilling example is the Alumbrados, a mystical group that believed in direct union with God without the need for clergy or church. They were Christians, yes, but their free, personal spirituality was intolerable for the Holy Office. Several were arrested, interrogated, condemned. Among them, a fascinating woman, Maria de Cazalla, sister of Dr. Cazalla, who defended spiritual ideas outside traditional molds. She was tortured, humiliated, and imprisoned for life. And then there were those accused of witchcraft. Although Spain did not experience witch hunts as massive as those in Germany or France, the Inquisition also prosecuted women, and some men, accused of making pacts with the devil, casting spells, causing storms, or provoking illnesses. The most famous case was the Inquisition of Zugarramurdi in Navarre in 1610. There, several villagers were burned for alleged demonic practices, often based on rumors, superstitions, or local feuds. But not all persecuted were defined groups. Some were targeted for having forbidden books, teaching philosophical ideas outside dogma, or simply speaking too freely. The index of forbidden books controlled what could and could not be read. And beware of having a work by Erasmus, Copernicus, or later Galileo at home. The Inquisition didn't just want to watch over faith, it wanted to control thought. And let's not forget the confessors. Yes, priests who revealed confessional secrets or advised their faithful on alternative paths. They too were judged, and some ended up in prison or exile. In total, it is estimated that the Spanish Inquisition prosecuted more than 150,000 people over its more than 3 centuries of history. Not all were executed, but many were humiliated, marked, dispossessed. Many lived under the weight of fear, generation after generation. And the saddest part, they were not always enemies of the faith. Often they were victims of circumstance, local rivalries, ignorance, intolerance, or simply chance. Because in the world of the Inquisition, anyone could be guilty. One poorly spoken word was enough. One misinterpreted gesture. One anonymous accusation. And yet, for centuries, all of this was accepted, even celebrated. Many saw it as a necessary evil. Others as a display of power. But how did such a feared institution sustain itself for so long? Who was really behind its machinery? And what role did the monarchy play in its expansion? Behind the veil of pointed hats, sambanitos, and bonfires, there were minds, there were offices, there was strategy. The Inquisition was not a group of fanatics acting alone. It was a meticulous, organized institution with the direct support of the kings. Yes, the monarchs. Because although the Inquisition was born within the church, it was controlled by the crown. From the very beginning, the Catholic monarchs made it clear the Holy Office must serve God, but also the state. And so it was. In 1478, Isabella and Ferdinand obtained a papal bull that allowed them to create an Inquisition completely under their control. That was revolutionary. Rome was losing power, and the kings were gaining it. Because controlling faith was also controlling identity, culture, and above all, resources. Yes, resources. Because each inquisitorial trial could end with the confiscation of property, and part of those assets went to the state. Faith and treasury marched together. And the inquisitors, far from being retired friars, were often jurists, cultured men, loyal to the monarchy. One of the most feared names was Tomás de Torquemada, the first Grand Inquisitor. A Dominican friar of Converso origin, yes, Converso, who became the most unyielding face of the Holy Office. During his tenure, the tribunal structure was established. Local inquisitors, notaries, secretaries, jailers, a whole bureaucratic system that spread through Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and beyond. Torquemada was cold, meticulous, relentless. For him, heresy was a cancer that had to be cut out at the root. Under his direction, thousands were executed. His name was etched in fire in the history of repression. But many more came after him. Diego de Deza, Fernando Valdez, Gaspar de Quiroga. Each Grand Inquisitor left his mark. Some were more moderate, others even stricter. But all shared one mission, to defend the religious unity of Spain, no matter the cost. And that's where politics comes in. Because in the 16th century, Spain was not just a country, it was an empire. and religious unity was considered key to the kingdom's stability. Internal enemies were seen as a threat as great as external enemies. A rebellious Morisco, a suspicious converso, a silent Protestant, could be considered traitors. Charles V, the emperor, supported the Inquisition without hesitation, and his son, Philip II, made it a central tool of his policy. While fighting Protestants in Flanders, in Spain, he ensured that not a single dissenting voice disturbed the order. It was the time of the Counter-Reformation, of Trent, of the total defense of Catholic dogma. Philip II surrounded himself with theologians, censors, inquisitors. He created a meticulous system of control over books, universities, sermons, and consciences. Spain had to be one in faith, thought, and morals. Dissent had no place, and the Inquisition was its shield. But not everyone applauded. There were criticisms, some from abroad, like those of European Protestants, who painted a fierce image of the Inquisition in what came to be called the Black Legend. Exaggerated or not, the legend showed Spain as a dark country, dominated by fanaticism, fire, and censorship. And within Spain, there were also dissenting voices. Humanists, Erasmus, thinkers who watched with concern as fear triumphed over reason. Some were silenced, others fled, and a few died for their ideas. But the most unsettling thing was this. The Inquisition did not act alone. It had the backing of the people. In many places, people saw the inquisitors as guardians of order. They applauded the autos da fe. They feared the heretics. They felt protected, though also watched. It was a perfect system of social control. Denunciation became a virtue, obedience, salvation, and thought, suspicion. Thus, among kings, inquisitors, and fearful towns, the Inquisition became one of the most enduring institutions in Spanish history. It was not just a religious institution. It was a symbol of power, a shield against difference, a mirror in which Spain, for centuries, looked at itself without doubt. But nothing lasts forever. Over time, the world changed. The lights of the Enlightenment arrived. Revolutions, new ideas about liberty, science, tolerance, and the Inquisition? How did it survive that modern world? When and how did it end? For more than 3 centuries, the Spanish Inquisition spread its shadow across the peninsula and throughout the empire. It controlled ideas, punished customs, silenced dissent. But by the late 18th century, something began to break. New ideas were coming from France, from England, from America. They were the ideas of the Enlightenment: freedom of thought, religious tolerance, science, criticism of power. And although the structures of the old regime still dominated Spain, some intellectuals began to question everything. One of them was Jovellanos, who criticized the educational backwardness and the lack of intellectual freedom. Another was Charles III himself, a reformist king who, although he did not abolish the Inquisition, limited its power. For the first time, the Holy Office began to seem outdated, a vestige of another time. But the decisive blow did not come through reforms, but through war. In 1808, Napoleon's troops invaded Spain. Joseph Bonaparte, the emperor's brother, was imposed as king, and under his brief and controversial reign, the Inquisition was abolished for the first time. It was the year 1808. That said, it barely lasted. When Ferdinand VII reclaimed the throne in 1814, he also restored the Holy Office. But the world had changed. The press, books, academies no longer accepted absolutism or fanaticism with the same docility. More and more voices demanded religious freedom, constitutionalism, and the end of the Inquisition. Finally, in 1834, under the government of the Regent Maria Cristina, the definitive decree was signed. The Spanish Inquisition was abolished forever. 356 years had passed since its creation. But did it really disappear? The structure vanished. The tribunals, the prisons, the sanbenitos, the bonfires, all of that was dismantled. But the psychological, cultural, and social impact of the Inquisition was profound, very profound. For centuries, millions of people learned to be silent, to hide, to obey without questioning. The fear of what they will say, of being singled out, of being different, ran deep in Spanish society. Suspicion, denunciation, self-censorship became habits. Even centuries later, well into the 20th century, some historians point out that part of Spanish authoritarianism and conservatism, though indirectly, stems from the inquisitorial legacy. And not only in Spain. In America, the Inquisition also left its mark. In Mexico, Peru, Colombia, the tribunals of the Holy Office persecuted conversos, indigenous people, mystics, women, thinkers. Censorship crossed the ocean. Fear globalized. But there was also resistance. People who dared to think for themselves, to write, to teach, to question. Many paid a very high price. But thanks to them, today we can tell this story. Today, the Inquisition is seen as one of the darkest symbols of Spain's past, a control apparatus in the service of intolerance, an institution that in the name of faith punished difference, silenced reason, and sowed terror. But it is also a lesson about the power of dogma, about how easy it is to justify punishment in the name of the common good, and about how dangerous it is to surrender individual conscience to an authority that watches everything. When we see images of an auto da fe, of a damp cell, of a victim under torture, we are not just seeing the past. We are seeing what can happen when faith is imposed over reason. When fear defeats freedom, when thinking differently is punished. And that is why it is so important to remember it. Not to judge an era with modern eyes, but to learn from it. Because, as the philosopher George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And the history of the Spanish Inquisition must not be repeated.